Love never gives up. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut, and it doesn't have a swelled head. It isn't always me first. Love takes pleasure in the flowering truth. Love puts up with anything. It always looks for the best and never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Love always wins.
So love does here at Trinity. We've been making disciples who share Christ's story with love for over 140 years. We're going to continue to do this with love, and so we're seeking to know what love is. And so here at Trinity, we've been talking about love does. We've been digging into the scriptures. A couple weeks ago, we looked at how love does in the parent relationship with their kids, and specifically, how do we love on the next generation? Last week, if you're with us, we talked about love does within the marriage relationship and saw that in the marriage relationship, we actually learn how to love one another, not just our spouses, but to love one another. And today we're talking specifically about neighborly love. Love does. And so as we get into this message, we're going to be going into the Old Testament, into the book of Leviticus. And so I don't know how many of us have ever studied Leviticus, but this is where we're going to begin. This is where we're going to pull God's truths out for us for today. And so we're in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 9. And so God has freed his children from the land of slavery. He's taken them through the Red Sea, and they're about to go into the Promised Land, and he wants to give them words to live by, words of truth, words of life, so they can experience true life in their community, but also bring true life into the whole world. And so he has this word for them. When you reap the harvest of your land, you should not reap your field right up to its edge. Neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. And you should not strip your vineyard bare. Neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. And so I think even though many of us are not farmers here, we hear what God is saying. We need to share our stuff with our neighbors. We need to take care of our neighbors with the resources that God has given to us. They're not just for us, they're for the whole world. And God continues, you shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. You shall not swear by my name falsely and so profane the name of your God. And then he says what there at the end? I am the Lord. He continues, you shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until morning. Take care of your employees, bosses. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. And then he says again, I am the Lord. You should not do injustice in court. You should not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. But in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. You should not go around as a slanderer among your people. And you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. And he says what? I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says again, I am the Lord. Ani Yahweh. Right? And so a couple of truths as we get into this message. First truth is this, is he is the Lord. Right? He repeats himself over and over again. Why is he doing that? I think in my life, I'm a dad, right? Wouldn't that be nice? Hey, kids, listen to me. Why? I'm your dad. Just listen to me, right? As a coach, I'm your coach. Listen to me. As a supervisor, just do what I'm telling you to do. Please do it. It's going to be easier for everybody. Listen to me. Maybe that's what God's up to, or maybe he's up to something else. But what we know in Leviticus, Exodus, when God is teaching his children and reminding them of all these truths that he desires them to live by, right? There's an echo from the Ten Commandments, the Ten Commandments of God. And many of our brothers and sisters who believe in Yahweh and use these commandments in their life, they understand the first commandment to be what God says in Exodus chapter 20, remember, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. Right, read Exodus 20. Right, God says this as he gives the 10 Commandments. Right, he sets it all up to live in the truth. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. Right, I am the one who is with you and is always with you, who is faithful, who heard your prayer and came to you to rescue you. I am the Lord your God. Therefore, don't have any other gods before me. Therefore, don't make any idols. Therefore, don't misuse my name. Therefore, remember the Sabbath day. Rest in me. You're not me. Therefore, honor your father and mother. Honor authority. Therefore, honor marriage. Don't commit adultery. Therefore, do not murder. Therefore, do not steal. Therefore, do not slander. Don't destroy your neighbor's reputation. Therefore, do not covet your neighbor's stuff or their relationships. I am the Lord your God. What is God getting at there? Right? When we talk about obedience, people talk about rules or relationships. If you have rules without a relationship, not good. If you have rules within a relationship, good. Right? What God is saying very clearly to his children then, listen, we're in a relationship together. I love you. Listen to me. I know what's best for you. Remember what I did? Remember what I'm doing? Listen. Right? Obedience. Obedience. I don't know how you feel about obedience. I don't know how you would define faith in God. We're actually going to be in a whole sermon series going through the Gospel of John in the next 8 weeks, beginning next weekend, called This is Faith. This is faith. So we're going to help understand what faith is and who our faith is in. But when we think about faith, we need to remember this. And if you're taking notes in the back of your bulletin, there's a fill in the blank. Faith equals obedience. If we say we believe in God, that he is the Lord our God, we're going to do what he tells us to do. Right, John 8, verse 31, Jesus said this, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. Right, if you obey my word, not just open up the Bible, not just come to church, but if you do what I've told you to do, you're my disciple. Right, you're living out your faith. You're obeying me. In a Krupski household, we were doing some confirmation videos this past week. And in the one confirmation video, it's a review of the 10 Commandments. And so in that review, there's a moment where we talk about motivation for obedience, right? And so I'll just ask you this, right? What causes you to do the right thing? What causes you to follow the rules that have been established in your life? Right? 3 different things come to my mind. One thing, and you actually see this in the scriptures, right? We obey God because we're afraid of the consequences if we do not. We know something bad can happen, right? And so I'm going to obey because I don't want the repercussions. I don't want the badness, right? Let's be honest. It's one of the reasons why we do the right thing, because we don't want something bad, right? Another reason why we do the right thing, obey, is because we want the reward, right? My kids said that's why we listen to you the most, Dad. Because we think you're going to get us something good. I'm going to get you a basketball pack of cards or ice cream, or I'll go play with you outside if you do what I tell you to do, right? The other motivation in the scriptures is that it's just pure and simple. It's a relationship, right? It's a loving relationship. That's why I'm going to listen to you, because I know you know what's best for me, and I love you, you love me. Here we go. The Apostle Paul actually says in the book of Corinthians, it's the love of Christ that compels me to be obedient to him. Right? It's that God has rescued us from the land of slavery, not Egypt, but the true land of slavery for you and for me. Through the cross, the land that's separated from him. He reconciled us to him through the cross. He has rescued us from the land of lies, the deceptions that destroy our life. He's rescued us from that. He's rescued us from unforgiveness. He's given us forgiveness, grace to remove that shame and guilt. He's rescued you and me. The Apostle Paul says, it's the love of Christ that compels me to obey him, to be his disciple, to listen to his words. And so I can't help but see it in Leviticus here, right? That God's echoing, I'm your God. I rescued you. I love you. Listen to me. Listen to me. Listen to me. I am your Lord. I am the one who has rescued you. The second truth that I can't help but see here in Leviticus is that it's Leviticus. I don't know how you feel about the Old Testament stuff. Like, that's old school. That's not relevant for us still today. Right? We have 66 books in the Bible, and I love the scriptures for so many different ways, for so many different reasons, right? God was genius as he put it together through different authors, different times, different periods, different styles, right? But it all fits together, and so we always need to allow Scripture to interpret Scripture. In the book of Leviticus, specifically 19, who else says this? Who else tells us to love our neighbors? Jesus. Right? And so the beauty of Jesus in the scriptures is Jesus takes the Old Testament and he talks about it. And he helps us to understand what applies to us, maybe what doesn't apply to us still. That was just for them then, but now this is for us now. And the beauty of what Jesus does there is also what his disciples do. So you have Peter, James, John, and Paul all saying, yes, this is still an eternal truth. Right? This was true. This is true. This will always be true. Love your neighbors. Right? There's something beautiful about the eternal words of God, and I love that this word is eternal. Love your neighbor. Right? I don't know what you think about when you think of heaven. Right? No more pain, no more suffering, no more sorrow. Right? Paradise. This is going to be amazing. Right? I think a lot of us think I'm just going to be worshiping God, singing praises to Him with others. Right? To hear the angels' choruses. Certainly, there's pictures of all this in the scriptures. There's pictures of a huge banquet right in heaven, a big wedding reception in heaven. What does heaven look like? What we do know in 1 Corinthians 13, right, faith and hope, those are not going to be in heaven. Right? The one that remains is love. Love remains even in heaven. Love for our neighbors in heaven, and certainly for God and received from God. Right? This is an eternal word from God, and so let's just let that settle in. At no point in our life here and there is this word not going to matter. Is this word not going to give us life? Love your neighbors. Right? Psalm 119 says this about the eternal word of God, this specific word. Right? Psalm 119, 111. Your testimonies are my heritage for how long? Forever. Right? For they are the joy of my heart. I incline my heart to perform your statutes. How long? Forever. To the end. Right? Forever. Right? So when Satan tempts us, did God really say that? Does that still apply to us? Yes, he did say it, and he repeated himself over and over and over again. Love your neighbors. And so we are called to love our neighbors because this is what love does. And here at Trinity, we've been talking about being real neighbors, real disciples. If you've been with us, I hope this isn't getting old for you yet because it's good for us to be reminded. R-E-A-L, real neighbors, right? Real disciples who do what? Reject passivity, engage with God, accept responsibility, and live courageous lives. This is what real neighbors do, what true neighbors do for each other. And so we as neighbors are called to reject passivity. To reject passivity, right? This is what love does. How many of you hit a snooze button this morning? Right? I hit a snooze button this morning. I apologize to my wife at the last service. She was there. Right? Good neighbors don't hit snooze buttons. Good neighbors reject passivity. Right? 1 Corinthians chapter 13, right? Love is patient. Love is kind, does not envy or boast, it is not arrogant, it's not rude, it does not insist on its own way, it's not irritable or resentful, does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Right? Real neighbors, real disciples, right? We take the opportunity, we don't make excuses, we seize the opportunity, we act in love towards our neighbors. I did a survey on Google. I don't know how many of you have ever gone to Google. I think we've all done that. It's a little dangerous when you ask Google a question, but here's the question I asked Google, right? What does it mean to be a good neighbor? And so a bunch of surveys have been done. People have been polled. People are looking for good neighbors, and so they want to speak about this. And so if you want to write these down, write these down. The first one is this that was on the list. A good neighbor is someone who's welcoming. I want a neighbor who welcomes me, who smiles at me, who waves to me. Right? That's what a good neighbor is. 2, a good neighbor is someone who strikes up a conversation, actually talks to me. I don't know when is the last time you've actually talked to your neighbor. A good neighbor is someone who's respectful and considerate. A good neighbor takes care of their lawn and garden. Right? A good neighbor is responsible for their pets. A good neighbor is responsible with their trash. A good neighbor respects boundaries and abides by the rules. Right? A good neighbor offers help. And a good neighbor not only has a party, but invites me to the party. Right? Are we good neighbors? Are we real neighbors who reject passivity? Right? Are we the good Samaritan in our neighborhood, with our neighbors? And yes, we're thinking about neighborhoods right now and neighbors in location, but we're all neighbors. So apply this to every relationship in our life. Good neighbors certainly reject passivity. Good neighbors also engage with God. Engage with God. And the question I have here is, how do we deal with stress? How do you deal with stress in your life? And I ask this because this is crucial to being a good neighbor, because if we're not dealing with our stress, how are we going to be a good neighbor for somebody else? Because what you and I know is true, blessed people bless others. Hurt people hurt others. So how do we deal with our stress? Because stress is real for all of us. I ask this question a lot in pre-marriage counseling because we do a stress profile so they can be good neighbors, a husband and a wife, right? Again, you got to be good neighbors in every relationship, but how do we deal with our stress? Right? And over again, this is what comes up, right? These are the good things that make me a healthy me. Right? If I exercise good, right? If I'm stressed out and I go for a run or I jog or I do some yoga or something for my body, right? I got to take care of my body. That's going to help me deal with my stress. Is that true? Yeah. I need to eat good. If I'm not eating good, I feel more stressed. If I'm eating healthy, right? That helps me. If I sleep good, right? If I'm able to talk it out with somebody, kind of vent, right? We call it word vomit, right? But what about being a faithful neighbor? Someone who goes to God with our stress. Right? The scriptures speak about this. Come to me with your stress. Right? Bring it to me. I want to help you through this. I want to help you have the strength. I want to help you deal with this in a healthy way. Lament to me, talk to me, and I'll give you truths. I'll give you promises. Do we engage with God? How do we deal with our stress? Right? 1 Chronicles 16:11 says this, look to the Lord and his strength. Seek his face always. His presence continually. Right? Are we doing that? How are we dealing with our stress? Our neighbors need us to engage with God. Right? Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, right? What's the song? How does it go? Sing it for me. It's a beautiful day. Won't you be my neighbor? Right? I can't help as I was preparing this message to just envision my neighbors actually singing that song to me. Right? Justin, won't you be my neighbor? Right? I need you to be my neighbor, Justin. Help our neighborhood, Justin. Right? And when I hear that, right, I know healthy me, right, is someone that engages with God. Right? Prayer time, devotional time, just worship time where I can sing to God, where I can listen to his songs and just let his truth just invade my heart and my mind so that I can go out there and actually be a good neighbor and help other people deal with stress, not bring stress to other people. Right? Good neighbors engage with God, and good neighbors also accept responsibility. Number one thing on being a good neighbor list, you know what it is? Handle conflict responsibly. That's what neighbors want us to do. Handle conflict responsibly. You know what that means? Apologize. Right? If we mess up, we fess up, even with our neighbors, right? If we don't live out 1 Corinthians 13, do we just let it go? No, apologize. When we mess up with our neighbors, it's not on our neighbor to come to us. It's on us to go to our neighbor to apologize, to make amends, to bring the olive branch. Right? In Corinthians, we hear this because it's a temptation for us. What business is it of mine, of ours, to judge outsiders? For what do I have to do with judging outsiders, right? The temptation of us is always to not accept responsibility, to divert the responsibility, to say they messed up the relationship, they're messing up. Accepting responsibility, being a disciple of Jesus, is owning up what we need to own up and do what we can to make amends. As long as it depends on us, we are the ones that can reconcile, that bring peace to the relationship. A good neighbor leads courageously, lives courageously. There was a question that was asked decades ago, and then last decade and still today, and the question is, if your neighbor invited you to church, would you go with them? If your neighbor invited you to church, would you go with them? Decades ago, and even this last decade, people were asked that, and it's over 80% of neighbors say, I would go with them. Which is a call for us as disciples of Jesus, if we really believe He's the way, the truth, and the life, and if we believe, right, the Ten Commandments, remember the Sabbath day, rest in God, that's what we're doing, right, the sacred assembly, that this is a good place, a holy place, a place where we truly find rest from the lies that are out there, and we can be filled up with more faith and community with each other. Right? Have we invited people? Were we invited people before COVID happened? Right? The call was invite them, and the high percentage of our neighbors actually say yes. Does that take courage to invite somebody to share Jesus with them, not just actions, but with words? Right? The survey was done again after COVID, thinking that now our neighbors probably don't want to come to church with us. But guess what? It's still the majority of people saying, if someone invited me to church with them, I would go with them. Just nobody's inviting me. I don't want to go alone. What would it look like to lead courageously? In the book of Romans, we hear this because it's not just on us that we have not been inviting people and using our mouths. But how then will they call on Him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in Him on whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? When I hear this and I think about being a real neighbor, a good neighbor, right, I'm reminded that I'm not the only preacher here. There's about 211 preachers here in the sanctuary right now. I don't know if you consider yourself a preacher, but you are. You are. I don't know how else to say that. It's not just on me. This is all of us. Right? We love with actions, and one of those actions are using our words. Right? And a simple move is, you want to watch church? How easy is that? Come over to my house. Let's do church online, right? Church online, let's do that, right? So many of you are online right now. Have we ever invited somebody to watch church online with us? Right? And certainly, hey, you want to go up to Utica, Michigan, Hall Road in Van Dyke? We got a sanctuary, we got a gym, we got different style of worship services, right? You want to come and hear about truth? Jesus, I don't know what your experiences have been like, but mine's been pretty good so far at Trinity. They seem to talk about Jesus. They seem to talk about the truth. They seem not to mix in a lot of garbage into what they're doing. Like they're focusing on Jesus. Right? This is good. The gospel. Right? Being a good neighbor. Right? And I think about being a real neighbor, I can't help but think about Jesus in John chapter 1, verse 14, where we hear this. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Word became flesh, tabernacled among us. Other paraphrases and translations of this Greek language say the Word became flesh and He moved into our neighborhood. Right? Jesus moved into our neighborhood. Imagine that. Right? That's what He did. He came and dwelt among us, and He's still with us. And we have seen His glory, the glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Right? He's with you and me. He is the Lord your God who has brought you out of the land of bondage. He wants to continue to set you free from the lies, from the deceptions of this world. He wants you to live in His truth, to receive His neighborly love first and foremost, so that we can give His neighborly love to our neighbors. That we would be real neighbors together, who reject passivity, who engage with God, who accept responsibility, and who lead courageously